352 kills, one pilot, one aircraft type. In aviation history, no number is more terrifying or more impossible to believe. August 24th, 1944. Erich Hartmann climbs into his Messerschmitt Bf 109 for what he doesn't know will be his final victory. Moments later, another Soviet fighter explodes in flames over Romania. Victory number 352, the highest individual score in the history of aerial combat. But Hartmann wasn't flying just any fighter. He was flying a variant of the most lethal, most produced, most successful fighter aircraft ever built, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. By war's end, 33,984 of these machines had been manufactured, more than any other fighter in history. In the hands of German pilots, they would shoot down more Allied aircraft than any other weapons system ever created. This is the aircraft that could have won the war. How did a bankrupt German engineer create history's ultimate aerial predator? How did one aircraft design dominate the skies of World War II from the first day of conflict to the last? The story begins not with Nazi ambition or German engineering superiority, but with personal failure, bitter rivalry, and one man's desperate gamble to save his collapsing company. Willy Messerschmitt was written off as a failure by 1931. His aircraft company had gone bankrupt. His designs were blamed for fatal accidents. Powerful enemies in the German Air Ministry wanted him permanently banned from military contracts. The aviation establishment considered him finished. Yet from this humiliating collapse would emerge the aircraft that created over 100 aces with more than 100 kills each. The fighter that enabled German air superiority from Poland to the gates of Moscow. The machine that nearly prevented D-Day and almost starved Britain into submission. This is the story of the Messerschmitt Bf 109. How a desperate engineer's radical gamble became the Luftwaffe's deadliest hunter, transformed aerial warfare forever, and came closer than any other weapons system to changing the outcome of World War II. To understand how the Bf 109 became history's most lethal hunter, we must first meet the man behind it. Willy Messerschmitt was not your typical aircraft designer. In 1931, his company had gone bankrupt after a series of commercial failures, and he found himself locked in a bitter personal feud with Erhard Milch, the powerful head of the German Air Ministry. Milch despised Messerschmitt and had publicly blamed him for several aircraft accidents. It seemed impossible that this disgraced engineer would ever build fighters for the new Luftwaffe. But in 1934, everything changed. The German Air Ministry announced a competition for a new single-seat fighter aircraft. 4 companies would compete: Heinkel with their He-112, Focke-Wulf with the FW-159, Arado with the R-80, and surprisingly Messerschmitt with his Bf 109 design. The specification called for a fighter capable of at least 250 miles per hour, a quantum leap from existing aircraft. Messerschmitt's approach was revolutionary. While his competitors focused on traditional design philosophies, emphasizing maneuverability and pilot visibility, Messerschmitt prioritized pure speed and structural efficiency. His design featured radical stressed skin construction, where the aircraft's skin itself carried structural loads rather than relying solely on an internal framework. The fuselage was narrow and streamlined, designed around the most powerful engine available. The first Bf 109 prototype took flight on September 28, 1935, initially powered by a British Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine. When fitted with the German Junkers Jumo 210 engine producing 635 horsepower, the early Bf 109A variant achieved speeds of 292 miles per hour, significantly faster than any competitor. The aircraft weighed just 4,850 pounds when fully loaded and carried 2 7.92mm MG-17 machine guns. However, speed came with a price. The narrow fuselage limited fuel capacity and created a cramped cockpit. The narrow track landing gear made ground handling treacherous, with a high landing speed of over 80 miles per hour that intimidated many pilots. Yet Messerschmitt had gambled correctly. In the age of high-speed combat that was coming, raw performance would matter more than gentle handling characteristics. In July 1937, the first Bf-109s arrived in Spain as part of the Legion Condor, Nazi Germany's covert intervention in the Spanish Civil War. This would be the aircraft's baptism by fire, and the lessons learned would prove invaluable. The early Bf-109Bs sent to Spain were armed only with machine guns, but German pilots quickly discovered a critical flaw when facing Soviet-supplied Polikarpov IM-16 fighters flown by Republican forces. The IM-16 was a stubby, highly maneuverable fighter that could outturn the Bf-109 in close combat. German pilots found that their machine gun armament was insufficient to achieve quick kills, often requiring extended firing passes that left them vulnerable to counterattack. Squadron leader Adolf Galland, who would later become one of Germany's most famous aces, reported back to Berlin that the Bf-109 desperately needed cannon armament to be truly effective. These combat reports led to rapid development of the Bf-109C and D variants, which incorporated 20mm MGFF cannons firing through the propeller hub. This gave the aircraft a devastating punch that could destroy enemy fighters with just a few hits. Spanish combat experience also revealed the importance of the Bf-109's speed advantage. German pilots developed tactics of diving in fast, taking a shot, and climbing away before the enemy could respond. By 1939, as war clouds gathered over Europe, the Bf-109 had evolved into the formidable E variant, nicknamed Emile by its pilots. This version represented the culmination of pre-war development. Powered by the new Daimler-Benz DB601A engine, producing 1,175 horsepower, the Bf-109E could reach 354 miles per hour at 12,300 feet. Its armament had grown to include 2 MG-17 machine guns above the engine and 2 MGFF cannons in the wings. German factories had already produced 2,193 Bf-109s of various models by September 1939, giving the Luftwaffe a substantial head start. However, the aircraft retained critical limitations. The narrow landing gear continued causing accidents, and more importantly, limited fuel capacity meant only 20 minutes combat time over London, a constraint that would prove decisive during the Battle of Britain. While the Battle of Britain had shown the Bf-109's limitations, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, would reveal its true potential. The Eastern Front became a killing field where German pilots in Bf-109s achieved victory ratios that seem almost impossible by today's standards. The Soviet VVS Air Force was caught completely off guard. Stalin's purges had eliminated most experienced commanders, and Soviet pilots received minimal training, often as little as 20 hours before being thrown into combat against the refined Bf-109F Friedrichs variant. The F model, introduced in 1941, represented the Bf-109's aerodynamic peak. Engineers had refined every curve and surface, creating what many consider the most beautiful variant ever built. Its DB601E engine produced 350 horsepower, pushing the aircraft to 390 miles per hour with exceptional climb rate, and energy retention that made it perfect for the tactics German aces had perfected. It was in this environment that legends were born. Erich Hartmann, who began his combat career in 1942 at age 20, would eventually become history's highest-scoring fighter ace with 352 confirmed victories. His secret wasn't reckless bravery, it was methodical precision. Hartmann's philosophy was simple: see, decide, attack, coffee. He would never fire until he was within 200 feet of his target, often closer. At such range, even a short burst was usually fatal. But Hartmann wasn't alone. Gerhard Barkhorn scored 301 victories, all on the Eastern Front. Günter Raul achieved 275 kills, surviving being shot down 8 times. In North Africa, Hans-Joachim Marseille became the Star of Africa, downing 158 Allied aircraft in just 2 years. What's remarkable is that these weren't isolated cases. The Luftwaffe produced over 100 pilots with more than 100 victories each, almost all flying variants of the Bf-109. The numbers from the Eastern Front are staggering. Hartmann's logbook shows he flew 1,404 combat missions, nearly 4 per day on average during his combat career. In 1943 alone, German fighters claimed over 15,000 Soviet aircraft destroyed, with Bf-109s accounting for the majority. By 1943, the Allies had learned painful lessons about German air superiority and were fighting back with rapidly improving aircraft designs. The technological arms race was intensifying, and the Bf-109's dominance was under serious threat for the first time since the war began. The British response came in the form of the Supermarine Spitfire Mk9, powered by the Merlin 66 engine. This variant could match the Bf-109G in speed, reaching 408 miles per hour, and actually exceeded it in climb rate above 20,000 feet. More concerning for German pilots, the Spitfire retained its legendary maneuverability while gaining the performance to compete in high-speed combat. From America came even more formidable opposition. The Republic P-47D Thunderbolt, weighing nearly twice as much as a Bf-109, could dive faster than any German fighter and was virtually indestructible thanks to its radial engine and heavy construction. The North American P-51D Mustang combined the performance of a Bf-109 with the range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, something no German fighter could match. German engineers responded with the Bf-109K Kurfürst, the final evolution of the design. Powered by the DB605D engine, producing up to 2,000 horsepower with MW50 methanol water injection, the K4 variant could reach 452 miles per hour, faster than any production Allied fighter. However, this came at the cost of increased complexity and reduced reliability. The technological arms race had shifted from pure performance to production capacity. In 1944, German factories produced 13,157 Bf-109s, the highest annual production of the war. But Allied factories were producing fighters at an even more staggering rate. The United States alone built over 38,000 fighters in 1944. Quality was suffering as quantity increased. Late-war Bf-109s were built using ersatz materials by forced laborers. The fuel crisis compounded problems. New German pilots might receive only 30 hours of flight training, while Allied pilots arrived with 200-plus hours. By 1944, 57% of all German fighter production consisted of Bf-109 variants, making any production disruption catastrophic for the entire Luftwaffe. When the last Bf-109 rolled off the production line in May 1945, the final tally was staggering: 33,984 aircraft produced over a decade of manufacturing. No fighter aircraft before or since has matched this production total. But perhaps more remarkably, the Bf-109's operational life was far from over when Nazi Germany surrendered. Spain had been operating Bf-109 since the Civil War, and after 1945 they found themselves with a substantial fleet but no source of spare engines. Spanish engineers solved this problem in an unexpected way. They re-engined their remaining aircraft with British Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plant that had driven their former enemy, the Spitfire. These hybrid aircraft, designated Hispano Ha-1112, served with the Spanish Air Force until 1965, making Spain the last operator of Bf-109s in military service. Even more ironically, Czechoslovakia continued production of the Bf-109 after the war ended. The Avia S-199, built in Czech factories using remaining German components, became the first fighter aircraft of the Israeli Air Force. Israeli pilots, many of them Holocaust survivors, found themselves flying modified versions of the aircraft that had once terrorized Allied bombers. During Israel's 1948 War of Independence, these Czech-built Bf-109s engaged Egyptian Spitfires in combat, a bizarre twist that would have been unimaginable just 3 years earlier. Finland, which had operated Bf-109Gs as allies of Germany, continued flying their aircraft until 1954. Finnish pilots praised the type's reliability and performance, with several achieving ace status, flying against Soviet aircraft during the Continuation War. The strategic impact of the Bf-109 cannot be overstated. From 1939 to 1943, German air superiority based largely on this single aircraft type delayed the Allied strategic bombing campaign by months. The Bf-109's design philosophy, prioritizing speed and structural efficiency over traditional handling qualities, influenced jet fighter development worldwide. The energy fighting tactics perfected by Bf-109 pilots became standard doctrine that persists to this day. Perhaps the most sobering statistic, of the approximately 100,000 pilots who flew Bf-109s during the war, fewer than 10,000 survived to see peace. So, was the Messerschmitt Bf-109 truly the fighter that could have won the war? The evidence is both compelling and contradictory. On one side, the statistics are undeniable. 33,184 aircraft produced, more than any fighter in history. Over 100 aces with more than 100 kills each. Air superiority maintained across multiple theaters for nearly 4 years. No other single weapon system has achieved such devastating effectiveness against aerial opposition. The Bf-109's impact extended far beyond individual combat victories. German air superiority enabled the Wehrmacht's lightning victories in Poland, France, and the early stages of Barbarossa. It delayed the Allied strategic bombing campaign by months, potentially years. It nearly starved Britain into submission during the Battle of the Atlantic by protecting U-boat bases from air attack. Without the Bf-109, D-Day might have been launched 2 years earlier, when German defenses were far weaker. Yet the aircraft's limitations ultimately proved decisive. The narrow landing gear that caused countless accidents. The limited range that prevented escort missions deep into enemy territory. The cramped cockpit that exhausted pilots on long missions. Most critically, the concentration of German production on a single design. By 1944, 57% of all German fighters were Bf-109 variants, created a strategic vulnerability that Allied bombing exploited. Perhaps more fundamentally, wars are not won by individual weapon systems, no matter how effective. They are won by industrial capacity, strategic resources, and the ability to train replacement personnel. The Bf-109 excelled in the hands of skilled pilots, but as veteran aces were killed and fuel shortages limited training, even the world's most successful fighter became ineffective. What cannot be disputed is the Bf-109's place in aviation history. It created more aces than any other aircraft type. It established tactical doctrines still used today. It influenced jet fighter design worldwide. From Willy Messerschmitt's desperate gamble to save his bankrupt company, emerged a machine that defined an era of warfare and came closer than any other weapon system to changing the outcome of World War II. The Bf-109's legacy lives on in every modern fighter jet and in the tactical manuals of air forces worldwide.